I'm Sherilyn Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 235 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. And today we're talking about how do I get my family off their phones? So let me begin this one by saying I do not have this fully figured out in my household. So this is definitely not an episode where you are going to hear me telling you exactly what I do or have done, and it's worked perfectly, and this is the answer. Because candidly, honestly, I think we are all involved in a pretty long-standing social experiment that we don't know how it ends yet. You know, that I was watching a movie with my kids during their spring break, and the movie was made in 2005, I think. And so at that point, my oldest child would have been like 1, the other 2 weren't born yet. And this was a movie that really predates social media in any meaningful way. It predates mobile phones that did anything more than be a phone and maybe text with a, multi-click keyboard. I don't remember what we used to call those. But that alone, the realization that, we have only been dealing with this era of phones being as ubiquitous as they are and also as multifunctional as they are, certainly as omnipresent as they are, is pretty recent history. In my case, and maybe in many of your cases, it overlaps directly with the years in which I've been a parent. So I really feel like while I have been busy trying to bring children into the world and get them to adulthood, I've also been navigating this changing landscape around the presence of what we refer to often, right, as technology or devices. So today I'm going to use the term devices, and I'm specifically thinking about phones, but I suppose you could put iPads and laptops into this. I should call them tablets, right, because it could be any brand. You could put gaming devices into this, but if we think about the one that's probably the biggest challenge for us as families, I think it's the phone, the smartphone with all of its many tantalizing capabilities. So this is a problem that's really relatable for me in my own household. It came up in a call recently, which seems to be a theme here for podcast topics lately. But I was coaching one of our coaching groups inside of Brilliant Balance, and we were talking about phones. That person specifically asked about, how do I get my husband off of his phone so that we can have some authentic connection? And then that parlayed into a conversation about all of the other family members in the house and ourselves as well, right? So I definitely want to put us into the equation, because if you're anything like me, you're probably just as guilty as everyone else of having that phone with you most of the time. So I'm going to break this episode down in a couple of directions, because I think the insight that I had and that I shared in that call was a little bit more about contextualizing why are we in this situation? And then how do we tip the scales back in our favor so that the phone doesn't win all the time? So the first thing I want to ground us in, I guess, is what is the problem? Right? If there is a problem here at all, what is that problem? How would we define it? And I'm defining the problem as the fact that everyone is on their own device, sort of lost in their own world, rather than being connected with each other, right? Rather than doing something that is a fully focused joint activity or having a conversation, et cetera. So that's how I'm defining the problem for the purposes of this episode. And I think there are certainly benefits, some of them pretty obvious benefits to having a phone. So this is not an anti-phone, get rid of your phone rant. I'm certainly not getting rid of mine. I think the phone has so many useful benefits, not the least of which is that everyone can be happy at the same time. We can sort of customize or curate our experience, our entertainment, such that everyone is happy and they're near each other and we're not, sort of fighting through who wants to do what. And obviously the utility of the phone has so many useful applications. I can't get very far throughout my day without wanting to look something up, verify that information, use a map, send a text to somebody. Like there's so many useful applications that exist within the phone. So I'm not here to argue the benefits, but there are also a lot of challenges associated with this environment that we find ourselves in. One of which I think is simply the loss of skill that we're experiencing in the art of compromise, the art of persuasion, or maybe just more plainly communication. Like it is harder and harder to sustain eye contact and to have that back and forth of a conversation that for me is one of the most exhilarating pleasures. Just being in a back and forth of a conversation is my favorite thing in the world. And so watching us sort of collectively as a society lose that is sad. I think there's a loss of patience coming with the phone. Like, think of the immediate gratification of being able to get exactly what we want when we want it. Whether that's an answer, whether that's some form of entertainment, the immediacy of our gratification is right there. And that does two things. One, it creates a sort of laziness creep. It's harder for us to gin up the energy to effort towards something, right? To persist, to grapple with or struggle with something because it's just a little too easy to reach over and get the answer or solve the problem. And it also, and I'm just sort of in the midst of learning about this, it reduces our capacity for pleasure. If it's too easy and we are a being that sort of seeks homeostasis or equilibrium, then we actually sort of have to create discomfort to offset the ease of that pleasure. We're like the little rat in the box who can get the pellet too easily. And so that is a little scary about, how we could be altering our brain chemistry with just the proximity of pleasure through the device. And I think another challenge as a parent, particularly, is the loss of monitoring. Think about if we were watching a TV show as a family, like probably happened when you grew up or when I grew up, our parents were there, or at least they had the potential to walk through the room. And so that ability to monitor, what were we consuming? Which book were we reading? Well, the book had a cover. What TV show were we watching? They were watching it too. And now that ability to sort of privately go and, watch something maybe quite innocently, but not then have a discussion about it or have the ability to have that monitored is definitely something else that we've lost. So when I look at some of the challenges or cons, some of them are in all of our relationships. Some of them are maybe a little more unique to the parenting experience. But I think it's clear that, this sort of world we're living in where you could go out to dinner and everyone is sitting at a dinner table in a restaurant, an entire family all on their own devices, or be on a car trip and everyone is on their own devices, or be in a living room or a kitchen or multiple rooms of the house and everyone is sort of lost in their own world. That's the dynamic that, I want to address today in terms of what is going on here, right? Why is that so tempting? And then what, if anything, can we or should we do about it? So what I think is going on here, like what really is underneath the challenge, is some of what I've already said, which is there are a lot of useful benefits in this device that makes it really tempting to pick up all the time. Okay, so that's table stakes. But I also think that we can't compete with the device as a human because it is a perfectly curated, sort of endlessly entertaining machine for its possessor. Okay. So think about it. The person who asked this question in my coaching group was starting the conversation talking about she and her husband. And my comment was like, look, that device wants to quote unquote, right, air quotes here, talk about whatever he wants to talk about in that moment. It is ready all the time and perfectly curated to be entertaining. You like sports, I will serve up sports all day long. You like news, I will serve up perfectly curated news, to your preferences. You like musical theater, here's all the musical theater content. You can watch clips, you can watch people break down shows. You like funny cat videos, here they are ad nauseum. You're interested in neuroscience. I'm going to feed you all the latest that you can, sort of roll up your sleeves and dig into. So think about that. It's almost like going into a library or a bookstore and everyone going to their own sections and just being able to spend hours and hours being really fed and nourished by the particular content that you've happened upon. And then having it get better at serving you that content over time, right? The AI element of the device is that the next time you go to the bookstore, it's even more delightful. And the next time, even more so. And so that becomes very, very sticky, right? Perfectly curated content. And I've said this before on the show, but I would really encourage you to do this experiment. Like, go pick up someone else's phone, your spouse's, one of your children's, and just look at their feeds. Look at what is immediately accessible to them. And all you're paying attention to is how different it is from your own. Your Facebook experience and their Facebook experience, your TikTok, I'm not on yet, your TikTok experience and theirs, your Instagram experience and theirs are so different. And that's really what's driving this insatiable desire to have the device, because it knows us, right? It is perfectly curated to our interests. That's hard to compete with, right? Because I do not want to talk about all of the same things that my husband wants to talk about, nor does he want to talk about my interests as often as the device is willing to do it. It will serve up podcast after podcast after podcast on his favorite topics or mine. And boy, is it tempting to just sort of walk around in the same house, but having a very different experience, listening to a very different, audio stream. So that's one sort of element that I think is what's going on here. Do you ever find yourself saying, I just need a minute to breathe? While the whole idea of meditation can sound totally intimidating, I've found that stepping away from the chaos of life, even just for a few minutes, is incredibly restorative. So if you're short on time, but could use a few moments of peace right about now, listen to my 5-minute meditation for working moms. It'll help you clear your head and come back to your day feeling centered and refreshed. Head over to brilliant-balance.com/breathe. Press play and settle in for a few mini moments of peace right now. The second thing that makes it really hard to compete with the device is that the device is at your service, right? It's one-sided. It doesn't ask anything in return. Oh, you want to play right now? Great, I'm ready to play. It turns on. I will start serving you whatever it is that you want. Oh, you're done playing and you want to put me away, and play in air quotes. You're finished with me and you're going to move on to something else. Great, I'm all done. I'm not going to say, hey, I wasn't finished yet, or let's stay in this conversation, or no, I want to make this point. That's not happening with the device, right? It is at your service. Oh, you want me to go down this rabbit hole investigating, some research question that you couldn't figure out on your own? Great, I'm ready to do that. Oh, now you want to get directions to where we're driving this evening? Great, I'll serve those up. It just, that on demand, at your service, I'm not going to ask anything return, you're the boss, is a dynamic that has been created where this little machine has sort of become like our little pet, right? It's our bestie, and it will do whatever we want when we want it. Now, couple that with what I said before, and it feeds us exactly what we like and gets better at it all the time. So it's like the best, servant ever. And that is very sticky, very, very difficult to extricate ourselves from. It's certainly feels addictive, right? To have something, some entity that just knows us and listens to us and respects our desires so much. So that's the second piece that's in our way, I think. And the third one is it's effortless, right? It is effortless. This thing, there is no wait. It's on demand. It is within arm's reach. I mean, I referenced a bookstore earlier, right? Or a library, but we had to get up and get in the car and go to the bookstore and sort of find our way to the section. Not anymore. Now it is right there. So we don't really even have to get out of our chair to have the entire world available to us. for just hours and hours and hours on end, we could get lost in that world, right? We could get lost in a world that's been created on this little, I don't know what it is, 3x5 screen, right? Also effortless, no compromise, no negotiation, right? So this is why we're losing that ability. We don't have to say, what movie do we want to watch? We don't have to say, do you like this sporting event or not? Are you willing to kind of participate? Do you want to talk about this subject or not? Do you share my opinion on this or not? There's no compromise with the device. There's no negotiation about start and stop time or about the content. And there's no work, right? There's no, I don't have to do anything to get my reward. I just have to turn it on. So there's no effort associated with the payback. And when something is effortless and it is within arm's reach and it is on demand, I mean, peeling and eating an orange is harder than this, than getting what we want. We have to go to the refrigerator and do a little work for that. So this is sort of the drive-through window. Like if you think about how fast food transformed our eating habits, where we could just quickly go and on demand get food, and the convenience aspect of that, this is doing to our minds what I think that evolution did to our bodies. So again, at its core, I think the challenge of what's going on when we're all saying like, why can't we get anybody off their phones, is we just can't compete with that, right? The deck is stacked, and it is stacked in favor of the device. So what do we do? What do we do about it as families, as partners, as parents, as friends? What do we do? And one of the things just broadly that I think we need to do is tip the scales, essentially creating an unfair advantage for ourselves. The device has the unfair advantage. We have to do something to sort of tip the scales back a bit in our favor. And I have 3 ideas that I think we're trying in my household, we're talking about in our coaching community that I want to share with you today. The first one is what I call no-fly zones, right? So this is where are the times and places that the device is just not allowed, right? It's just not going to be there. So when you think about places, it could be places like the dinner table. We're not going to bring the devices to the dinner table. They have to be out of arm's reach during a shared meal. And, if you don't do a family dinner, it could be any sort of sacred shared experience in your family that is just, this is the time, or this is a particular place or environment where we don't bring them. Another example could be while we are watching a movie. So I know a lot of us are, we're watching this with everybody, but we also all have devices in our hands. And there's sort of this half in, half out dynamic. So that could be a second place, is to say, while we are committed to having this experience, to watching this movie or this show or having this conversation, we're going to, for that duration, put the devices out of reach. And another one that came up was car rides, and I know car rides are a time when it is wonderful, especially long car rides, to have everyone entertained and happy and quiet on their own. But you could take even a piece of the car ride and say, for this piece of time that we are all in the car together, we're going to really focus on having a conversation and not bring the phones out during that car ride, whatever duration. This is spring break season, so maybe you're in a long car ride that, might be too long to do the whole ride, but is there a piece of it that could be a no-fly zone? And then in addition to places, it could be times of day, like before this time in the morning or after a certain time at night, the phones get put away. And you can use the technology to support this. So I was really late to the party on the idea of time limits on the iPhones, which is what my family has. There is a way within settings to establish screen time limits for your own phone, but also for any family phones that are linked to your account. And that can be a place where the phone just turns off after a certain time of day. It's not really accessible anymore, or where certain apps have time limits set on them throughout the day. So that's another, it's sort of the after a certain hour, you can get a prompt from the phone to help you set that limit. And even planned breaks, like I am going to put this phone away for the next 15 minutes and I'm not going to touch it. and I'm going to maybe even put like an old school Post-it note on it while I do that says like planned break or 15 minutes or phone is off, like, because the habitual nature of reaching for it is really hard to break. And you will, without even thinking, break your own rule without some kind of a reminder. So before a certain time in the morning, after a certain time in the evening, or a planned break is another way that you could use the device to help you. Second idea, besides sort of these, off times, is gamifying the idea of breaking the habit. Can you as a family, as a couple, or just you independently use gamification to help? So for example, the phone jar, where you come, if you can't get everybody to put their phones away, can you put a big glass jar or bowl in the middle of the table and have everybody put their phones in it? And then it's sort of like the first person to reach for their phone has to do the dishes or something to that effect. You could use fines, that there are fines when we break these rules. Oh, you brought your phone to the movie, and so this is what the family fine is, which doesn't have to be monetary, right? But some kind of gamification to see, can we collectively sort of challenge each other to have more conversation and less individual time? And the third way, I guess it's related, is to foster shared experiences, to really be overt about the intention of having a shared experience. Like it's planned explicitly and jointly. Like we know that we're here to have this activity together, so we're going to put the phones away. And if those are scheduled and people know they're coming, that might go over a little better than, hey, mom says we're now going to have a shared experience. Everybody put your phones down. Well, if you're in the middle of something, or one of your children or your spouse is in the middle of something, that may not go over as well as, hey, tonight when we watch this movie, we're going to all put our phones away and we're going to really just have the experience together and talk about it, right? Or, hey, on that car ride to grandma's, we are not going to have our phones out. And we're just all going to agree to put them away. We don't need the directional devices. We know how to get there, and we're going to just store them in mom's bag. And then when we get there, we'll deal with the phones again. So having it be like a joint decision on when we think we can do that and tolerate it can maybe make it a little bit, help you get some buy-in to this idea. Okay. Those are the three ideas. Those are the three ideas that we're going to try: fostering more shared experiences, a little bit of gamification to harness everybody's competitive spirit, and, trying to put some boundaries around where and when the phones are on. Even short breaks, even small 15-minute, 30 minutes of intentionally not using the phone is just a good reminder for all of us of how ubiquitous they have become. And remember, we're fighting an uphill battle. I mean, it is an effortless, at your service, perfectly curated best friend that we are competing with here. And that is no small task. So collectively, we're going to have to figure out, how do we make peace with these devices without losing our human connection to them? And I hope you got a couple of ideas today that you can use. Hey, we talk about stuff like this all the time in the Brilliant Balance community. So if you are not already in our Facebook group, come on in. You're going to go to Brilliant Balance inside of Facebook. Just go to groups, find us there, and check in from time to time, right? Like it is not lost on me that this community operates in the virtual realm and that it requires a device to access our podcast, to access our content. And so it has to fit into the curated times of day or of the week that you are going to use that for connection, for entertainment, for education, just like all of the other things that are competing for and vying for your time. And I hope that you take back things that you learned here and some of the connections that you're making in this space, and that they nourish and fulfill you in your family and friendships and the people that you are with out in the real world as well. That's all for today, my friends. Till next time, let's be brilliant.
This is the podcastfactory.com.